Okay, so have you ever really thought about what it means to jump into public service? Especially when, so many people see politics as, well, dirty and nasty,
Right.
or maybe how all those different parts of being American, the things we agree on, the things that split us apart, how they're always kind of pulling at us.
Yeah, that tension.
Exactly. So today we're doing a deep dive. We're looking at excerpts from The Audacity of Hope by Barack Obama.
Great source material.
It is. And our mission, really, is to get past the headlines, pull out the key ideas, the stuff that might surprise you, and just get a better handle on the American experience through his eyes, his unique perspective.
Hmm.
We want to explore what public life is really like, the values underneath it all, and that constant push and pull between, what we want things to be and the messiness of how politics actually works.
That idealism versus reality.
Precisely. So let's start where the book kind of starts. He gets hit with this question right off the bat. Where'd you get that funny name? And then right after, why on earth would you go into something dirty and nasty like politics? I mean, wow. That just captures so much public feeling right there, doesn't it?
It really does. It's so blunt.
So what's behind that cynicism, and how does he kind of push back against it?
Well, that question, it just lays bare this deep, deep cynicism.
Mm-hmm.
He saw it especially in the low-income areas he was trying to represent.
Okay.
And he says it was nourished by a generation of broken promises. People just felt let down.
Makes sense.
But his answer, his whole approach, was to frame public service differently, as a tradition, based on the simple idea that we have a stake in one another,
Right.
and that what binds us together is greater than what drives us apart. So it's this real idealism, right up against that kind of grim public view. That's his starting point.
But that idealism, it must have bumped up against the less shiny parts of the job pretty quick. He talks about a point where the pleasures of politics, like the excitement, shaking hands.
Yeah, the adrenaline of debate, the animal warmth.
Right. That stuff started to pale. So what were those tougher realities? What kind of impact did they have?
Oh, the book gets really specific about the meaner tasks.
Hmm?
Constantly asking for money, which he clearly disliked.
Yeah, nobody likes that.
Endless driving, bad food, stale hotel rooms, and then the personal side. Clipped phone calls with Michelle, who he says was getting pretty fed up with raising our children alone
Whoa.
and beginning to question my priorities.
Yeah.
And even the actual lawmaking, the stuff he thought he'd love, started feeling too incremental, like small potatoes compared to the big national fights.
So it paints a pretty tough picture, the personal costs.
Definitely of a very stark picture.
But, okay, even with all that, the low points, the struggles, his campaign also had these moments of, almost unbelievable luck. Spooky good fortune, he calls it.
Yeah, that phrase really stands out.
Like that story from the St. Patrick's Day parade, marching just a few paces ahead of the city's sanitation trucks, waving at almost nobody.
Huh? Yeah, it's a great image. And it sets up this contrast because things did turn around in surprising ways.
How so?
Well, endorsement seemed to just appear. Things fell into place. And then the big one, the Democratic National Convention speech, 17 minutes.
Prime time.
Totally unfiltered, uninterrupted airtime. Changed everything overnight, really.
Huge moment.
And then his opponent's situation. The Illinois Republicans picked Alan Keyes, who Obama describes as so fierce and unyielding that even conservative Republicans were scared of him.
Which, politically, was a gift.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He calls himself an outlier, a freak to the insiders. It just highlights how much unexpected stuff, how much luck seemed to play a part.
Which really hammers home how fragile political power can be. He tells that story about Al Gore.
Oh, yeah, after the 2000 election.
Right. Gore tries to pitch a TV show idea, and the executive he's meeting with basically treats him like just another guy asking for money.
He wasn't Al Gore, a former vice president. He was just one of the 100 guys a day.
Exactly. It's brutal.
It really is.
Yeah.
And Obama draws a clear lesson. In politics, there may be second acts, but there is no second place.
Yeah.
It's a stark reminder, isn't it? Power is temporary.
It is temporary.
And for you, the listener, it makes you think, right? How much influence is tied just to the office, not the person, and how fast it can all just vanish.
Yeah. Okay, so moving beyond the personal side, the media's role comes up a lot, how it shapes what people think.
Mm-hmm. Big theme.
Obama notes that politicians are under this constant microscope. Every statement I made would be subject to scrutiny, dissected, interpreted in ways over which I had no control. How does that change how they talk, how they act?
Well, according to him, it forces them to become incredibly careful. Guarded.
Makes sense.
He says, jokes got screened, irony became suspect, spontaneity was frowned upon, and passion was considered downright dangerous. It sort of drains the authenticity out of things.
So you end up with very cautious, maybe even robotic public figures.
Kind of. It's a real tightrope to walk, trying to be genuine in that kind of environment.
And it sounds like that guardedness, that fear of being twisted, feeds into a bigger problem he talks about. The breakdown of, like, shared facts.
Yes, exactly.
He mentions the juxtaposition of competing press releases and how sometimes objectivity just means printing talking points from both sides.
Without any perspective on which side might actually be right.
Yeah. So no sense of actual truth.
Well, he brings up that famous Daniel Patrick Moynihan quote, "You are entitled to your own opinion, but you are not entitled to your own facts."
Classic.
But Obama argues that, unfortunately, that idea no longer holds. He sees the media landscape as splintered into 1,000 fragments, each with its own version of reality.
Wow. Okay.
And he gives that example, the Newsweek story about the Koran incident at Guantanamo and how Fox News handled it on their screen crawl. It shows how easily facts get spun.
Right. Spun to fit a narrative.
Exactly. And the key takeaway here, the really worrying part, is that if you can't even agree on basic facts, then thoughtful compromise just goes out the window. How can you debate constructively?
You can't, really. So, okay, in the middle of all this division, the media noise, where do Americans find common ground? He talks about his conversations with regular people.
Ordinary folks.
And he says, no blinding insights emerged, but what did come through was just how modest people's hopes were.
Yeah, and consistent.
And how much of what they believed seemed to hold constant across race, region, religion, and class. So what were those common hopes? What connects people?
He lists them out pretty clearly. Things like a job that pays enough to live on, not going bankrupt if you get sick.
Basic security?
Right. Good schools for the kids, a shot at college, feeling safe, clean air and water, having some time for family, being able to retire with a little dignity.
Things most people would probably agree on.
Pretty much universal aspirations, yeah. Which leads to that big question for you, the listener. If these hopes are so common, why is our politics so incredibly divided? There's a huge gap there.
A real disconnect. And that seems to be what he calls the dead zone of politics.
Yeah, that phrase again.
He says the vast majority of Americans, Republican, Democrat, and Independent, are weary of the dead zone that politics has become. How does he explain why we're stuck there?
He talks about these mirror images, how both the left and the right explain the world. Often, he says, it's through stories of conspiracy of America being hijacked by an evil cabal.
Us versus them narratives.
Totally. And he points out these stories aren't really designed to persuade the other side. They're meant to keep their own supporters riled up, convinced they're right.
Firing up the base.
Exactly. And in that kind of struggle, he calls it Manichaean. Like pure good versus pure evil compromise starts to look like weakness, like selling out.
Which makes progress almost impossible.
Pretty much gridlocks the system.
So within that landscape, he digs into core American values. He talks about these twin strands, individualism and community being in tension.
Autonomy and solidarity, yeah.
So can you unpack that a bit? How do those two ideas pull against each other?
It's fundamental, really.
Yeah.
On one side, you've got this incredibly strong belief in individual freedom, liberty.
The American ideal.
Right. And Obama uses his own experiences, seeing places like Indonesia or Kenya, where rights depend on who's in power. That really drove home how precious American freedoms are. Michelle Obama saying, "I never realized just how American I was after visiting Kenya." That captures it perfectly.
Wonderful.
But then on the other side, there are these essential communal values. Family, looking out for your neighbors, patriotism, duty, faith, fairness, kindness, all the stuff he calls the glue upon which every healthy society depends.
So we value both independence and community.
Exactly. And navigating that tension, finding the right balance, is sort of the ongoing American project.
And this connects to something really core, introduced through his mother's question. How do you think that would make you feel? He calls the lack of asking that question an empathy deficit.
Yes, a really important concept in the book.
What does he mean by that? What are the consequences of not having enough empathy?
He links it directly to big systemic problems, like maybe we tolerate failing underfunded schools because we don't truly see those kids as our kids.
Oof, yeah.
Or, how could a CEO give himself a huge bonus while cutting health care for workers if he thought they were, in some sense, his equals?
Good point.
And maybe leaders would think twice about going to war if they envisioned their own sons and daughters in harm's way. His conclusion is pretty stark. It's not a question we ask ourselves enough.
Yeah.
As a country, we seem to be suffering from an empathy deficit.
It really makes you stop and think about the human impact of decisions.
Absolutely. The human cost.
Okay, let's pivot to the economy. Globalization comes up, and he talks about it being a double-edged sword.
Very much so.
He uses that visit to the Maytag plant in Galesburg, Illinois. Tells the story of Tim, a worker whose son needed a liver transplant, but they'd already maxed out their health benefits. Just heartbreaking.
It's a devastating anecdote.
Yeah.
And it really personalizes the downside of these huge economic shifts.
What's the bigger picture there?
He describes it as a winner-take-all economy. You see strong growth overall, maybe big productivity gains, but wages for a lot of people are just flat.
Stagnant.
Right. And companies are shifting more costs, more risks, healthcare, retirement onto the employees themselves. And a really crucial point he makes is that the jobs being lost often paid better than the new jobs being created.
So people are working just as hard or harder, but falling behind.
That's the reality for many families, yeah. More precarious.
Which brings up the whole question about government's role. He talks about FDR's New Deal, that social compact.
Right, built on 3 pillars, as he saw it.
Which were?
Decent paying jobs, employers providing benefits like health insurance and pensions, and then a government safety net, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid.
The basic foundation.
Yeah. And he argues that this compact wasn't just about fairness, it was also smart economics. It rested on an understanding that a system of sharing risks and rewards can actually improve the workings of the market. Creates a stable middle class that buys things.
Interesting. How does he contrast that with, say, the ownership society idea?
He sees the ownership society, which often emphasizes things like private accounts, individual responsibility, as doing the opposite. He argues it magnifies the uneven risks and rewards, helps the healthy and wealthy get ahead, but leaves people who are sick or struggling with less support.
So less shared risk.
Exactly. It pushes back against that core idea that we have a stake in each other's success.
And of course, whenever you talk about government programs or safety nets, the big question comes up, how do we pay for it?
Always the budget question.
What's his take on that, particularly around wealth and taxes?
Well, he brings in Warren Buffett. Buffett points out that the market is great at creating wealth, but not so great at distributing it fairly.
Okay.
And Buffett's view, which Obama highlights, is that those who benefit the most from this system should pay a bigger share. Buffett basically says, at a certain point, one has enough.
That's a pretty direct challenge to some economic thinking.
It is. And it forces you, the listener, to ask, what do our budgets, our tax policies actually say about what we value as a country? Do they line up with what we say we value?
Good question. Okay, shifting gears again. Race and identity. Obama's own background is so unique here. The child of a black man and a white woman.
Yeah, his description of family holidays looking like a UN General Assembly meeting is pretty vivid.
It is. How does that personal story shape how he sees race in America, both the progress we've made and the problems that stick around?
Well, he definitely acknowledges the progress, the growth of the black middle-class Latino families whose hopes are largely indistinguishable from their white counterparts. That's real.
Okay.
But then, almost in the same breath, he points to the stubborn gap in income, in wealth, and the everyday stuff, the usual litany of petty slights, like being followed in stores or pulled over by police for no good reason.
So progress and problems at the same time.
Exactly. Which leads to that critical question for you, listening. How do we square being one people with these very real, persistent disparities? It's complicated.
Very. And he doesn't avoid the tough stuff, like inner-city poverty. He describes the dark, boarded-up buildings, the rubbish everywhere. How does he approach that issue?
He notes that, sadly, images of inner-city poverty have become so common in pop culture that people almost become numb to it, indifferent.
Rather than sympathetic.
Right. And he looks at the different explanations, the conservative focus on cultural pathologies versus the liberal tendency to sometimes downplay or ignore how behavioral patterns are part of the problem.
Trying to find a middle ground.
More like acknowledging complexity. He stresses how important community institutions and family structures are, especially addressing things like the decline of the two-parent black household. And then there's that quote from the teacher.
The one from Dodge Elementary.
Yeah, they're not these kids, they're our kids. Just cuts right through the distancing language. So powerful.
It really is. Okay, and then immigration, another hot-button issue. He mentions the fears of an uncertain future. that it sparks, not just among whites, but many blacks, too.
Right, acknowledging the anxieties are widespread.
What are those anxieties? And what's his response?
Well, the economic fears, worries about wages being driven down, pressure on schools and social services, and cultural fears, too, the idea that maybe Latinos are inherently too different.
Okay.
Plus that feeling some people have, a loss of sovereignty, like they are the ones being forced to change, not the immigrants.
He captures those feelings.
He does, but then he counters it with that really moving story about Christina, the young Mexican woman at her naturalization ceremony, whose son was serving in the U.S. military in Iraq at that very moment.
Wow.
And for him, that moment led to the realization that America has nothing to fear from these newcomers. It's a story that really tries to bridge the gap between fear and hope.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about faith. His own background is really interesting. His mother, the anthropologist view of religion. His father, an atheist who saw it as superstition. How did he find his way to faith?
It wasn't a straight path, clearly.
Yeah.
He says he was really drawn to the power he saw in the African-American church tradition, its power to spur social change.
Faith as action.
Exactly. Faith as an active, palpable agent in the world. And he liked that the black church seemed to understand that faith doesn't mean that you don't have doubts, that the line between sinner and saved was more fluid, less rigid.
So a faith that embraces complexity, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Like that.
Less about perfect piety, more about struggle and transformation in the real world.
And that personal perspective then informs how he talks about religion in public life, right? It mentions Alan Keyes saying Christ would not vote for Barack Obama.
Right, and the whole Republican strategy to knock that halo off your head.
Yeah.
Politics getting mixed with faith in a very aggressive way.
So how does he think faith should operate in the public square? It's a tricky balance.
It is. He points out, on one hand, how sometimes religious talk has been used by conservatives as cover to ignore issues like poverty or corporate wrongdoing.
Okay.
But on the other hand, he argues that secularists are wrong when they ask believers to leave their religion at the door. He points to historical figures, reformers, who use religious language powerfully for good.
So it's not about excluding faith, but figuring out its proper role.
Exactly. Which raises that question for you, the listener. How can religious values inform the debate in a positive way without trying to impose specific beliefs on everyone else?
That's the million-dollar question. Does he offer any, ground rules?
He tries to. He makes a distinction. Reason and science involves the accumulation of knowledge based on realities that we can all apprehend, things we can test, observe.
Okay, shared reality.
Whereas religion, by contrast, is based on truths that are not provable in the same way. Faith-based truths.
Different kinds of truth.
Right. And he argues that politics, more like science in this sense, needs a common reality to function. We have to persuade each other based on things we can broadly agree on.
Makes sense.
But politics also involves compromise, the art of the possible. And religion, at its core, often does not allow for compromise on fundamental beliefs.
So you can't just apply religious doctrine directly to law.
That's his point. He argues for a sense of proportion, using issues like birth control or gay marriage as examples where rigidly applying one religious view doesn't work in a diverse democracy. It's about finding a way to discuss these things respectfully.
And he gets very personal on this, doesn't he, with the gay marriage issue after the Keyes debates?
He does. He talks about getting a call from a lesbian supporter who challenged them.
And his reaction.
He really wrestled with it. He admits his own unwillingness to support gay marriage is misguided and wonders if he'd been infected with society's prejudices.
That's incredibly candid.
It is. And he concludes, "I don't believe such doubts make me a bad Christian. I believe they make me human, limited in my understandings of God's purpose and therefore prone to sin." It's a remarkable moment of self-reflection about grappling with faith and evolving views.
Really powerful. Okay, let's shift to foreign policy. He starts way back with manifest destiny.
Yeah, the historical context.
And he points out it's two sides, right? The
Yeah.
idea of spreading freedom, but also the reality of bloody and violent conquest.
Exactly. The idealism and the brutality right from the start.
How does he trace that idea forward?
Well, it evolves into overseas expansion, Hawaii, the Philippines, after the Spanish-American War. Teddy Roosevelt saying the U.S. must play a great part globally.
Okay.
Then Woodrow Wilson tries to reshape it, make the world safe for democracy with things like the League of Nations. But that didn't stick initially. The U.S. turned isolationist for a while.
So a real back and forth on America's role.
Constantly being redefined.
Then after World War II, you get the Cold War order, Truman and others building this new architecture, mixing Wilson's idealism with hard-headed realism.
Right, trying to contain communism but also build institutions.
What worked and what didn't in that Cold War approach, according to Obama?
Well, the big success was avoiding nuclear war and enabling a lot of economic growth. That's huge.
Can't argue with that.
But he's very critical of the flaws and contradictions, like supporting dictators, thieves like Mobutu, thugs like Noriega if they were anti-communist, or overthrowing elected leaders.
The darker side of the Cold War.
Definitely. And he argues those tactics, secrecy, misinformation, eventually seeped into domestic politics, especially during Vietnam, breaking the bond of trust between the government and the people.
Which brings us closer to the present. Post 9/11, he mentions his trip to Iraq and observing how the Bush administration brought back a kind of Cold War rhetoric, accusing critics of being soft on terrorism.
Yeah, that framing of dissent is disloyal.
What were his main worries about the Iraq War itself and the broader foreign policy after 9/11?
His concerns about Iraq were specific. Didn't see it as an imminent threat, thought the reasons given were weak, felt diplomatic options weren't fully explored.
Okay.
But more broadly, he argues there was a lack of a coherent national security policy after the Cold War ended and then after 9/11. Just sort of reacting case by
What
case.
hawk decisions?
Kind of. And he raises those challenging questions about inconsistency. Why Iraq but not North Korea? Why Bosnia but not Darfur? It suggests there wasn't a clear set of principles guiding intervention.
So what kind of threats does he see as primary now, if not just nation states?
He talks about a shift towards asymmetrical threats. Things like terrorist networks, pandemics like avian flu, climate change, threats that don't respect borders,
Less predictable, maybe?
and harder to counter with traditional military power. He argues that while nation-states are less likely to attack the U.S. directly now,
Because we can retaliate.
right, they have an address, but the very interconnectivity of the modern world empowers non-state actors who would tear that world down.
So globalization creates new vulnerabilities.
Exactly. But he also points to solutions, like the Nunn-Lugar program, which helped dismantle nuclear weapons in the former Soviet Union, as an example of successful international cooperation being key.
Proactive, cooperative security.
That seems to be the direction he points towards.
And he makes this really interesting connection between domestic policy and global standing, saying the U.S. has a bigger stake than we do in strengthening international institutions.
Yeah, linking home and abroad.
How do our actions here affect our influence out there?
Directly, he argues. Spending billions on questionable weapons while, say, chemical plants at home aren't secure, that looks bad. Detaining people without trial undermines our talk about rule of law. Not improving fuel efficiency weakens our position on climate change.
So our credibility depends on practicing what we preach.
Pretty much. His point is that perfecting our own democracy, leading by example, isn't separate from foreign policy. It's a vital part of it.
That's a powerful connection. Okay, let's bring it back home for the final stretch, the human side. Politics, family, courage.
Yeah, the personal toll again.
He talks about the juggler family, parents scrambling to pay the bills, look after their children, maintain a household, and maintain their relationship. That sounds like, well, like life for a lot of people.
Incredibly relatable. He digs into the economics of it, stagnant wages for men, rising costs, how mom's paycheck went from extra income to essential.
Right.
Yet paradoxically, he notes the average two-income family might be less financially secure now than a single-earner family was 30 years ago. More income, but more costs and less security.
Wow. And he gets personal about his own family.
Very much so. Talks honestly about Michelle's sacrifices, the endless negotiations over household chores, and realizing that when kids came along, the expectation was that she would make the career adjustments, not him.
A common dynamic, unfortunately.
A very candid admission about the pressures on modern families, even his own.
Which leads into that paradox of public life versus private sacrifice. That goodie bag story is great.
Yeah, Michelle telling him he couldn't handle buying party favors.
You'd walk in there and wander around, and then your head would explode. It's funny, but it says something deeper, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It highlights his feeling that he's not always giving my family all that I could, the guilt over missing a school potluck for a vote,
Yeah.
and that poignant reflection that the window for making such memories rapidly closes, wanting his daughters to remember him like Michelle remembers her dad for the small, daily, ordinary acts, the love earned by simply being there.
That's the trade-off, isn't it? The cost of that kind of career.
A profound personal cost.
So wrapping up, how does he deal with that common feeling, that cynicism, that everyone in Washington is just playing politics?
He pushes back on it, actually. He says, based on his experience, most politicians are pretty likable folks, people who genuinely want to get things right and make things better.
Despite the perception.
Right. But he does acknowledge the frustration with the process itself, the unsatisfactory nature of the legislative process. Votes are complicated, compromises are messy, and constituents get angry.
Someone's always unhappy.
No matter what you do, someone will be angry at you. That's the reality he realized. It takes, as JFK said, courage.
And he ends that thought with a quote someone shared with him.
Yeah, an older guy at a town hall meeting quoting Justice Louis Brandeis. In a democracy, the most important office is the office of citizen.
Turning it back to us.
Exactly. Which leaves that final important question for you, the listener. What does it really mean for you to hold that office, the office of citizen?
Wow. Okay, so this deep dive. We've gone through the personal costs, the media's impact, American values and divisions, economic shifts, faith, foreign policy. It really shows how digging into a source like this brings out so many layers.
It really does connect a lot of threads.
So after exploring all this, the audacity of hope, but also the tough realities, maybe the final thought to leave everyone with is this. If trying to reach for our best ideals is always going to be messy, imperfect, how do we, as citizens, balance our hopes for a better world with the compromises and the disappointments that just seem baked into politics, into the human effort of trying to govern ourselves?
That's the enduring challenge, isn't it? Something to keep thinking about.